Hey, greetings everybody. GleeCon here again with another episode of War of Warcraft. We are getting down to the nitty gritty. We are in the final few chapters of our current novel, the Richard A. Knack novel. He likes to write long and winding tales. His last one that we read was the Day of the Dragon wasn't that bad. What I wouldn't really make it fit that description too much. But the War of the Ancients was definitely big. It became a trilogy, and then this one became a 5-part, really quite a large novel for the story that it contains. But we'll have a synopsis of everything. We'll try to reserve that for the end of the next couple chapters. All right. So in the last one, we basically they kind of got their butts whooped again. They keep trying and basically battering themselves, they being the aspects against Galakrond. This time they had Tyr's help, and Tyr had his hand bit off, which is why he's Tyr the One-Handed, which goes with his symbol. Anybody that knows any of the Warcraft lore can recognize that fist in Tyr, and here's the origin of that. They flew off with the wounded Tyr into what would become the Dragon Blight, which also they've mentioned this is where the bones of Galakrond will rest. So we know that we're approaching the final showdown from that perspective as well. And while they're there, they fought a little bit of random undeads, and Tyr disappeared. So Galakrond came back to them, and he tried to attack them, and they just kind of tried to huddle and hide. And he's so massive, like mountains and landslides came down, and they barely survived. So stay a while and listen to this one. It's chapter 3 of part 5 of the Dawn of the Aspects. This one's called Five Against the Impossible. Malygos and Kalak followed the ridge, just as the voice in the Proto-Dragon's head had suggested. But if they expected something spectacular or startling at the end, they were both disappointed. Instead, the mountains opened up into a bowl-shaped valley that for some reason bothered Kalak. Malygos simply saw it as another destination, one that Galakrond perhaps would not search, or already had searched and abandoned. A stream flowed through the area. The 5 proto-dragons landed to drink and think. Never in their lives had they had to think so much. Glancing at the others, Malygos wondered if they felt as worn out as he did. He blinked. Far beyond the 5, a rounded rock drifted where the water widened. Even proto-dragons knew that rocks did not drift, so Malygos fluttered up into the air and flew to the object. Kalak's host veered back the moment he recognized what it was that lay half submerged. As Malygos had suspected, it was another proto-dragon body. However, as he finally dared to alight next to it in the stream, he noticed something peculiar. A splash behind him announced Neltharion's more enthusiastic arrival. Striding up to Malygos, the charcoal gray male scrutinized the find.
Dead, Galakrond. We should destroy before it rises.
Malygos shook his head.
Already did. This was not living. That is dead again.
Sorry about that. The other proto-dragon let out a snort of disbelief. He prodded the corpse, which, having already been rotting before its second death, now easily began breaking apart in the water.
How could not living be not living again, unless we destroy it?
Kalak, ever paying attention, also wondered. His first inclination was that either another proto-dragon had managed to do as Neltharion suggested, or the undead had for some reason simply collapsed. Yet Kalak had seen no evidence of the second occurring, and his host was also disinclined to that answer. Which only left the question of who had indeed destroyed this fiend. Another keeper? Malygos leaned closer. His sharp sense of smell detected another scent, one that at first he assumed had to be there for a very logical reason. Then as he eyed the decaying remains, something else about their condition registered. Before, they had looked dry. Now they were barely holding together. When Malygos did a little prodding of his own, the part not yet touched by the flowing water simply crumbled to ash. As that happened, the scent or stench Kalak's host had smelled increased tenfold. The source escaped Neltharion's mouth before the other proto-dragon even knew why he spoke the name.
Galakrond!
No, Galakrond, Malygos interjected. In a more subdued voice he added,
Not anymore. What do you mean?
Even Kalik was not sure of Malagos' thoughts at that moment, for what little he could read from them did not make sense. Yet Malagos quickly verified those questionable thoughts.
Galakrond was here. Galakrond devoured this not living.
Neltharion looked at him as if he were mad. The other three, just joining to see what fascinated the pair so much, had heard Malagos' declaration.
Galakrond ate this not living?
Nosdormu asked in utter puzzlement.
Already ate it alive. Why eat it dead? What's left to eat then?
Asked Alexstrasza, sniffing at the corpse and wrinkling her nose.
Galakrond, yes. Not long ago.
The female's eyes narrowed in thought.
Malagos is right. But this was dead,
Neltharion insisted.
Long dead. No meat. No life.
Indeed, there was only the growing odor of rot. However, Malagos smelled a wrongness in that rot, as if something else tied to it also escaped at the same time.
This lived. This died,
he began, seeking to organize his words enough to make sure that everyone, himself included, understood the full extent.
Became not living. Moves, but is dead. Dead, but moves.
Kalik was naturally the first one to grasp what Malagos was leading up to. Even as a former aspect of magic, Kalik doubted that he would have come to what was the only possible conclusion before his young host had. Of the 4 proto-dragons, it was Ysera who comprehended quickest.
Not living move. Something moves them. No blood, no life, but something. Not life,
Neltharion muttered.
They have not life.
The proto-dragons had not lived long in a world full of undead, as Kalik abruptly recalled he had, but they had come to grasp an important point. Still, the animated corpses of Galakrond's victims were not exactly like most of the beings the blue dragon gradually remembered having confronted. What drove these appeared merely to be, as Malagos hinted, a force that was perhaps a byproduct of Galakrond's absorption of the living creature's life essence. It was almost a parody of that essence, which made calling it not life very appropriate. But to go from that step to Galakrond now absorbing this essence was disturbing. Why? Kalik asked himself, aware that he echoed Malagos in this regard. Why? Again, it was Kalik's host who discovered the possible reason. Malagos raised his head and looked off in the distance. Only Kalik knew that he listened for something in particular.
No cries, Malagos rasped. No calls. All fear, Galakrond,
Alexstrasza pointed out.
All flee or hide, or die. Galakrond still grows, still changes. Proto-dragons grow when they eat enough.
The icy blue male used his wings to indicate the mountains.
Nothing else for Galakrond. Nothing big enough. Nothing simple, except not living.
Even though all 5 understood now, Kalik saw through Malagos that they nevertheless did not want to accept such facts. Galakrond devouring what animated the undead was to them like the behemoth moving far beyond cannibalism. However, what bothered Kalik most was what this new and horrific feeding meant for Galakrond's continuing metamorphosis. If absorbing the essence of its victims had turned him into such a misshapen monster, it followed that this would only twist him more. The 5 proto-dragons took no heart in the possibility that the number of undead might eventually be eradicated by Galakrond's hunger. They knew that the foremost focus of Galakrond's existence remained seeking out living prey, especially them. To Malagos, that gave him no choice. Still, once again, he tried to keep the rest from what appeared a doomed quest. Malagos looked to the other 4.
Must face Galakrond, now, alone. No,
Alexstrasza pushed herself into the middle of the group.
We are family. We fight together, always.
She did not mean family in the sense that they were simply loyal friends, but rather as if the 5 of them were of a like color and appearance, born from the same kind of eggs. There was no deeper connection.
Yes,
Neltharion agreed with some indignation at Malagos' initial suggestion.
We fight as family. We fight together.
But we are not family, Ysera countered. We fight differently, not same. She did not say it in denial of her sister's words, but with the tone that those differences were still important. Malagos nodded, having considered that, and also seeing it as their greatest strength, perhaps their only hope, too.
We fight differently, he said. We fight together. More. We use differences. Tyr showed some, but Tyr not proto-dragon. Not plan like proto-dragons. We must plan like proto-dragons.
It made the only sense to Malygos, although Kalik was not quite so certain. Tyr, for all his might, for all his obvious wisdom, had led the five as if they fought like him. He had used their individual abilities, yes, but in terms of complementing his own. He had been fighting a proto-dragon, a huge proto-dragon, as if facing something like himself. But Tyr had been correct in that their individual abilities could work in concert better than if they had all been of one true family. 5 Malygoses would not have had a better chance. 5 Neltharions would not have. And Malygos also had to admit that not every combination of 5 different proto-dragons could have worked together as well as when Tyr had led them. He could only imagine what a group that included someone like Koros would have done against Galakrond.
We have not won.
Malygos curtly reminded himself.
More likely we will lose everything.
But even more than for himself, Malygos remained concerned for his 4 companions. He had to make certain that he guided them as best as possible, and that meant using their different skills to their utmost.
I am only a proto-dragon.
The thought jolted through Malygos with such force that Kalik also felt the flash of fear. Still, all Malygos had to do was look at Neltharion and the rest, who in turn waited for his word, to know that there was no retreating from his dominant role. But there was another who seemed willing to help take much of the burden from him. He looked to Alexstrasza. She already appeared to understand his concern. With a brief, solemn glance at Malygos, Alexstrasza immediately focused on Neltharion.
How do your kind fight? Tell us. Show us.
Neltharion bared his teeth in a reptilian grin. He spread his wings and began to display the fighting skills of his family. The vision shifted, but while Kalik would have liked to know more about the abilities of the other 4, he was not surprised about the change. In fact, for the first time, the blue dragon felt comfortable with the shift. He did not see that this might not be a good sign for him. The scene before him could not be taking place all that long after the previous one. The 5 remained in the mountains, but now they perched atop part of a crooked peak, watching and waiting. But the sky remained conspicuously devoid of a creature so vast he could hardly be hiding. There were also no signs of the undead, which disturbed the group's leader.
Where is Galakrond?
Malygos growled.
Where?
He stretched his wings restlessly before finally understanding what they had to do.
Must bring him to us. Must let him know about us.
He let out a roar. As he expected, it echoed throughout the mountains, yet to his ears it did not sound nearly loud enough. Before Malygos could suggest it, Alexstrasza raised her head and repeated his call. The other 3 imitated her, all 5 within seconds, shouting as one. The echoes of their combined cries resounded, even building as they rushed away from their source. As loud as they were, it would still have been impossible for most normal proto-dragons to hear them, unless they were within 2 or 3 hours' flight away. But then there was nothing normal anymore about Galakrond. Thunder rose in the east. Thunder with an oddly regular pattern.
No, not thunder,
Malygos finally deduced.
Only the beating of very, very large wings.
And as the rest of the 5 turned in that direction, the heavens there darkened. A Galakrond, half again as huge as when they had previously seen him, moved ponderously toward the 5. He hacked and coughed every now and then, and each time he did, the aura faded slightly. Malygos took note of that as he rose from his perch. Not for a moment did he think that Galakrond would fall easy prey to them, if defeating him was even possible. However, any potential weakness had to be exploited if there was any hope for the proto-dragons. Confident that the others knew their parts, Malygos flew without hesitation toward Galakrond. The behemoth ceased coughing. The aura returned. Galakrond stared at the puny figures approaching and laughed. The mountain shook at the sound, which would have easily drowned out the smaller cries Malygos and his companions had uttered earlier.
Little morsels,
he bellowed almost congenially.
There you are.
The 5 defenders said nothing. They spread out as they approached.
My meals grow dry. So dry,
Galakrond continued merrily.
Nasty taste, but I am so hungry.
The brutal eyes focused on Malygos.
I am always hungry,
he exhaled. The 5 had been waiting for just such a move. They immediately rose higher in the sky and also separated farther. The noxious mist unloosed by Galakrond spread far and wide, but in trying to keep all 5 in range, the misshapen behemoth instead came up short against each. Ysera came closest to being caught at the edge of the mist, but a hard push by the yellowish female saved her at the last second. Hiding his relief at her narrow escape, Malygos bore down on Galakrond from above. The icy blue proto-dragon opened wide and attacked. The column of frost shot toward the gigantic Galakrond, who met the tiny assault with another mocking laugh. At that point, Alexstrasza shot in and grazed a long section of Galakrond's torso with flame. Against the hard hide, the fire did little. Against the extra eyes, it did much more. They melted like butter. They dissolved like water. They blackened like wood. With expert aim, Alexstrasza destroyed every eye in a broad section of Galakrond's left side before immediately soaring far out of sight. The monstrous proto-dragon roared, but this time in a tone that brought grim pleasure to Malygos and Kalak. Galakrond had experienced pain that he had not suffered even against Tyr.
I will devour you first,
He shouted at the vanishing Alexstrasza.
I will savor your life. I will make you one of mine, and then I will devour you again.
Malygos could not help shuddering as he continued with his part of the attack. All five faced the same potential fate, being turned into one of the not living, and then having even that existence serve as a bitter but still desired snack. No sooner had Galakrond turned to look after Alexstrasza than a column of sand coursed over the other side of his torso. Spread in much the same manner as Alexstrasza's flames, Nosdormu's assault also concentrated on whatever extra eyes had grown there. At such velocity, the sand cut like tiny claws, at the very least blinding by irritation, but more often scouring and scratching orbs until no ability for returning sight remained. And as the fire-orange female had done, Nosdormu shot off in another direction. Tyr had made some use of the methods by which proto-dragons fought, but that use had been tempered by his non-proto-dragon mind. Malygos's kind, meaning all families, preferred to hunt alone, but when there was the need to go after very large prey, proto-dragons became adept pack hunters. Packs kept their prey off balance and fought as partners. Tyr had failed in the end because he had chosen to make himself the primary threat against Galakrond. The lack of equal coordination between Tyr and the Five had been the reason for their failure then. Together, Malygos and Alexstrasza had sought to correct that mistake. They only hoped that they had not simply found another path to failure. There would be no third chance. They fought and won here, or they fought and perished here. And if Tyr was correct in one thing, after their destruction, there would be no hope for their world. Concern far more than where his next meal came from was not something Malygos would have ever believed possible for himself. He knew that the others had come to be like him. They feared not only for themselves, but for everything. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives if it meant saving their world. Malygos had thus far been the only one of the three to remain dangerously near Galakrond. He now became the rapidly more infuriated monster's center of attention once again. But Galakrond did not exhale as Malygos had calculated he would. Instead, the Leviathan reached down with both hind paws and ripped away parts of the nearest mountains. He did so with such speed that Malygos was only just banking away when the huge chunks of solid earth came hurtling after him. One missile passed Malygos barely a breath later. The icy blue male gritted his teeth as he waited for the second to do the same. Unfortunately, it caught his left wing hard instead. The impact first spun Malygos around. The agony stirred up nearly forgotten pain from previous injuries, but that meant little compared with the short, rapid glimpses of Galakrond that the smaller proto-dragons caught while tumbling in the sky. Galakrond took up more and more of his view each time, and yet Malygos could not right himself any faster. Worse, he saw that not only were all four of Galakrond's major paws filled with more dirt and rock, but those extra appendages that Malygos could make out were doing the same. The terrifying behemoth unleashed an immense barrage with only one obvious purpose, ensuring that Kalak's host would not escape destruction. Despite the peril to Malygos, he wondered where Ysera was. She had been set to attack when next Malygos distracted their foe, and regardless of Malygos' own fate, he had expected the others to carry on. But instead of Ysera, it was Neltharion who dived into the fray, ignoring the part of the plan he was supposed to undertake. He shrieked loudly as he neared Galakrond's ear, more loudly in fact than Malygos would ever recall the charcoal gray male roaring. The sonic attack literally shook Galakrond, so close had Neltharion dared to get. A storm of rock and earth rained down on the mountains as the misshapen beast involuntarily released his hold on nearly everything. Growing too confident, Neltharion remained to watch his assault a moment longer than the sense indicated. For that, he received a hard blow as Galakrond's wing swept forward. Malygos saw their plan collapsing faster than tears. He had thought that he and Alexstrasza understood their own kind better than the two-legged being had. Of course, Galakrond, for all his transformation, was also still a proto-dragon. In some ways, having forgotten that, Malygos wondered if he and his companions had simply flown into certain doom. He started forward to help his rescuer, only to have Alexstrasza fly in before him. Like Ysera, apparently she had abandoned their strike-and-retreat plan, but unlike her missing sister, the fire-orange female had not abandoned her comrades any more than Neltharion had. Coming from the side where she had blinded Galakrond by searing away his extra eyes, Alexstrasza raced toward the massive gullet. As she closed, she performed what Malygos and Kalik thought looked like an act of suicide. Alexstrasza briefly roared. It was enough to draw Galakrond's eager attention, anticipating devouring a tidy morsel, his jaws opened wider. Alexstrasza exhaled, clearly using every bit of breath she had. A huge plume of fire raked over the gargantuan proto-dragon's inner mouth, an area as unprotected as the eyes. The soft flesh near the gullet blackened. Galakrond reared back, all thought of devouring the female proto-dragon gone. Malygos watched wide-eyed, astounded that their fearsome adversary still had such a tender area. He had thought the region within the maw might be vulnerable, but targeting that had been too much to ask of any of his comrades. What proto-dragon would willingly fly into Galakrond's mouth? Alexstrasza, it seemed. Galakrond began to hack and cough. He violently shook his head. His pained roar resounded so loudly in the mountains that it threatened to deafen the others. Wings flapping, he pushed higher into the sky. The hacking and coughing continued as Galakrond swung his head to and fro in an attempt to ease the burning. Alexstrasza continued on with Neltharion, who remained aloft but still suffered visible disorientation. She reached out with her hindpaws to take his shoulders and guide him to safety. Over the mountains, Galakrond's cry came to an abrupt halt. The hacking and coughing faded a moment after. The malevolent eyes of the huge proto-dragon swept over the vicinity. Although it clearly aggravated his new injuries, Galakrond exhaled long and wide. At the same time, his gaze went beyond Malygos. A sense of foreboding stirred within Malygos, and he hurriedly looked over his shoulder. More than a dozen not living converged from behind him, cutting off that path. Malygos understood then that Galakrond had also planned ahead, and with better success. The angle at which the not living flew revealed that they had come from above the cloud cover. Having only found the destroyed corpse, Malygos had assumed that the rest had followed that one into oblivion. Instead, Galakrond had at least Malygos, Neltharion, and Alexstrasza trapped between the undead and the will-sapping mist. Nosdormu appeared on Galakrond's other blinded side. He assailed the exhaling monster with one sandblast after another, obviously using himself up, but as aware as Malygos of the dire circumstances. Without turning his head to the brown proto-dragon, Galakrond brought his tail up and with perfect aim struck Nosdormu hard. Stunned, Nosdormu collided with one peak. Chunks of rock flew free. They dropped in among the mountains, accompanied by the limp body of the brown male. And as the tail withdrew, an increasingly frantic Malygos saw that, like the rest of Galakrond's macabre form, it had eyes. Eyes that more than made up for those lost to the smaller attackers. Galakrond continued his impossibly long exhalation. Malygos retreated backward as the cloying mist closed upon him. Alexstrasza, still aiding the disoriented Neltharion, was easily caught up in the mist. She attempted to thrust Neltharion ahead of her, but although he tried to fly harder, it was not enough. A ragged hiss from behind Malygos was his only warning that he had nearly flown into the approaching undead. Kalik's host spun to face the new threat, well aware that doing so also enabled the mist to cut the distance to its victim. A hungry pack of undead, or a fog that would leave him easy prey for their even hungrier master. Malygos anxiously looked back and forth, trying to find some path to freedom. The mist blanketed everything above and below, and the animated corpses blocked all routes ahead. There was nowhere for the icy blue male to fly. And as death encroached from all directions, Malygos and Kalik wondered what had happened to the one missing member of the failed venture. Where was Ysera? All right, guys. Sorry, that was a lot of background chatter. The dog doing his attention-seeking dinner time thing, a lot of the household activities going on behind. So I'm trying to bust these out. I'll be in a couple episodes here. I want to try and get these done today because I'll be going out of town for a little while after this. So there will be a few days where there'll be no content. So I would like to at least leave the book done for anyone that wants to hear through it. All right, cool. We got a couple left. We got another episode in the pipes, 5x5. I thank everybody so much for watching and listening. And despite it all, I hope you still enjoyed it. See ya next time on Lore of Warcraft.